In 1983, three friends were up to some mischief one Friday night. They were 13, 14 years old at the time. Sometime that evening, they left home and went to what we called the Bluffs, which was a wooded area overlooking a creek and sandbar. Parked in the area was a van, and it was clear to my friends that a couple was inside having sex. They decided to play a prank. They decided to play a prank on the couple by sneaking up and shaking the van. As they approached the vehicle, one of the boys found a large rock. Once they started rocking the van, the one that found the rock threw in on top of the van, causing a loud commotion. All three ran into the woods to hide. A half-naked, angry man emerged from the van's side door with a shotgun and began yelling profanities. My friends got scared and began to slip away quietly toward home. They heard something move in the woods between them and home, so they tried to flank it. The noise kept moving with them and kept itself between them and home. At some point, they decided to run for the hay bales, which was a farm with a barn and hay stacked high around it about a mile away. They had to stop a couple of times to catch their breath and regroup. Each time they heard something stalking them. At some point, panic set in, and it was one boy, for himself dead, sprint to the hay bales. After they all arrived, they hid close together in the stacked bales and remained as quiet as they could. A short time later, they heard movement about 8 feet above them on top of the stacks of bales. They heard heavy breathing right over the top of them. A feeling of dread came over them. After several minutes, the breathing stopped. They stayed hidden in the hay bales for several hours until daylight. Once they felt safe, they walked home. I was married for 22 years. My ex told me the story of when she was about 10 years old playing at the park by herself early on a Saturday morning. None of her friends were out yet because it was really early. She looked across the river that was nearby and saw what she described as a Sasquatch, an ape-like man walking on 2 feet. Scared, she ran home and didn't really talk about the experience. She didn't really talk about the experience until she met me. One night, while we were just talking about stuff, she told me about this experience she had when she was a kid. Now, she's not the kind of person that tells stories and makes up tall tales or jokes around too much, so I really believe her to be honest with me. After about 18 years of marriage and my wife getting embarrassed every time I tell the story, I asked my mother-in-law if she recalled my ex-wife coming home and telling her this story, just to see if she could corroborate it right. It's at this point that my mother-in-law, who has never cracked a smile in her life or told a joke, I exaggerate, but not much, says no. But let me tell you about the time I saw Bigfoot laying down in the field when I was a child playing. It turns out that she was in a field and there was this old abandoned shack off in the distance, and as she looked up, this Bigfoot was apparently laying in the grass. Got startled by this kid coming closer, so it got up and started to walk away. A friend and I have seen at least 3 Sasquatches in the woods near our apartment complex since February 2018. Back in December or around then, we found some large footprints in the snow, but didn't think much of it. 2 months later, I saw a a 6'6" creature with brown fur fording a river. Its arms swung when it walked, so I knew it wasn't a bear. Plus, we don't have them in the area. It couldn't have been a person because you can't get to where the creature was at. In the time since, we've heard, seen, smelled at least 3, maybe 4 different Sasquatches in the same woods. For those curious, we saw them in the Agawam Flynn Forest in East Providence, Rhode Island, which is almost in Seanock, Massachusetts. I used to drive truck across the continental 48 states from Maine to Los Angeles, from Seattle to Miami. I've driven the entire length and breadth of the United States. I drove exclusively overnight. It's my natural schedule anyway, and I'm driving partners always appreciated. On this occasion, I was driving truck through the Appalachian Mountains, quiet late at night, somewhere around 3 a.m. I'm drinking a Mountain Dew, listening to an audiobook, and focusing on the road in front of me. Suddenly, something dashes across the road in front of my headlights. I only see it for a few moments, but there's something completely wrong with it. Its bipedal head, its head is in line with my windshield, which means it must be 10 feet tall. It's hairy, and while it's human shaped, there's something off about it that I can't explain. For those brief moments, I see it. It looks misshapen, hunched over. All the lines are wrong. And then, in a flash, it's across the road and gone. And I can never prove it was ever there. The encounter took place outside of Guapiles, Costa Rica. I didn't see anything, but what we heard was still pretty freaky. I and my brothers went to bed at around 10 p.m. After maybe 15 minutes, we started hearing light tree knockings down the road. After a while, we started hearing a very low growl-like thing, almost like a mountain lion. It eased off after a while and came back. Later on, we heard something land on the roof. Things going on the roof aren't rare. In fact, it happens every night. But the strangest thing we heard that night was a tree being pulled out. A few things I'd like to mention is that there are a lot of chickens down here in cattle. Going towards a river, a man said that a ghost was looking through his window. His house is on stilts. If it was looking through the front window, it would be normal. But if it was looking through the bedroom window, the face would have been about 7 feet and 5 inches off the ground. And that we think we might have heard an oscillate a few nights before that. My encounter happened back in September of 2002 in southern Illinois. A friend and I, both 16, just returned from seeing the movie Sightings in the theater. My friend's house was about a good 10-minute drive outside. My encounter, southern Illinois, 2002 of our town, which is already rural. Well, later that night, around midnight, we decided to take a walk down the old farm road next to his house that cut through the woods for about a half mile to an open field in the woods, roughly the size and shape of a football field. So we grabbed 2 flashlights and started out into the woods. The whole way out, we were trying to freak each other out since we just got done watching a scary movie. We made our way out to the clearing and were in the corner of the field closest to his house, and We heard footsteps from the opposite side of the field, pretty far off. Our crappy economy flashlights wouldn't reach, so we both turned off out lights. We both turned off our lights to try to let our eyes adjust to the dark and squatted down. When we turned off the lights, the footsteps sound stopped. At this point, we are looking towards the opposite side of the field. A few minutes have passed and we were talking quietly, trying to figure out who the hell would be in the middle of the woods at midnight. The closest neighbor lived about 3 miles down the road. Suddenly, to our right, we hear something massive running at us. This thing had to be huge. The sound of its feet hitting the ground is like nothing I've heard to this day. They just had so much weight behind them. The steps sounded bipedal, one foot after the other. Our adrenaline kicked in and I moved faster than I've ever in my whole entire life. I literally felt like I was flying. We ran back to his house in a dead sprint and locked the doors. We briefly discussed what happened and went to bed. Strangely, we never really spoke about it again. I completely forgot about that night until about 9 years later. I recently got out of the Navy and moved back home. I ran into my friend from that night and he brought it up. He had apparently put a good amount of thought into that night over the years. I wasn't very interested in the topic at that time, so I kind of just shook it off and moved forward in my life. Years later, I can't quite figure out what happened that night. There have been a few BFRO reports in my area during the same time period. Not mine, but my uncle's. Was told to me by my grandparents and my mom, including my mom's other siblings. So basically, I heard it at one point or another from everyone on my mom's side. Back in the 70s in South Windsor, Connecticut, my mom grew up in a small neighborhood, all new development houses, all new development. One of the neighbors a few houses away told my grandfather, who sold him the house as my grandfather did this as a side job, that one night he was in the kitchen and his dog was going crazy barking at the back sliding doors. Figuring the dog needed to go out, he opened the door and the dog ran out only to start whimpering and run back in. The guy told my grandparents he saw a huge creature standing 7 to 8 feet tall in his backyard. He got scared and locked the slider. Never saw it again. Well, my uncle was playing hide and seek with his siblings. My mom's was one of 7 and neighborhood kids. He decided to hide in the next door neighbor's garage. Anyway, he hiding and hears some loud noise. Thinking it's the kids finding him, he peeks around the corner of the car and sees what he describes as a huge, hairy creature leaving the garage, which walks out of the garage and into the woods across the street. And now, that's weird, is that both stories were connected to later. My grandparents mentioned it sometime later when my aunts and uncles were grown up, and they put 2 and 2 together. The neighbor saw it in the summer of 77. My uncle saw it in the summer when he was 12, which happened to be the summer of 1977. Anyway, wasn't there for any of it, obviously, but still pretty cool to hear.